They laughed when the farmer's son spoke of dew points. But when every engineer failed, he listened, not with tools, but with instinct. What he did next turned a silent, dead machine into a humming legend. And by Friday, the impossible sang. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The colossal, dust-sheeted silhouette of the Kronos engine dominated Base 7 of Sterling Precision Engineering, a cathedral of advanced manufacturing where failure was a rarely spoken, almost heretical word. Yet, for 6 agonizing weeks, the Kronos, a prototype meant to revolutionize sustainable power generation, had been a monument to exactly that. Its gleaming, intricate assembly of exotic alloys and unheard of magnetic conduits lay inert, a multi-million-dollar paperweight that mocked the assembled genius of Mr. Alastair Sterling's hand-picked team. Sterling, a man whose ambition was as polished and unyielding as the chrome in his showroom, paced before it now, his Seville rose suit a stark anomaly against the backdrop of lathes and diagnostic arrays. His face, usually a mask of cool command, was tight with a frustration that vibrated in the hushed workshop. He had summoned the best, Dr. Eris Thorne, whose theoretical papers on energy matrices were legendary, Lena Hansen, whose practical engineering prowess could coax life from a stone, and a rotating cast of specialists whose daily rates were astronomical. All had prodded, scanned, theorized, and ultimately retreated, muttering about unforeseen resonant dampening or subquantum flux inconsistencies. The Kronos remained stubbornly, expensively silent. In the periphery of this high-stakes drama, sweeping metal shavings from beneath a CNC machine, was Liam Henderson. 20 years old, with hands already calloused from a life split between his family's struggling hill farm and this, his first real job away from the demanding cycles of planting and harvest. He was an engineer, not formally. His father, old Thomas Henderson, had worked the land his whole life and had secured Liam this position as a general workshop assistant through a distant acquaintance, hoping it would offer his son a future beyond the unpredictable yields of their stony acres. Liam was quiet, observant, his movements economical, his gaze often lingering on the intricate machinery around him with a focused intensity that most mistook for simple-minded daydreaming. He understood machines, not from textbooks, but from years of coaxing life from ancient tractors, recalibrating worn-out threshers, and listening to the subtle sighs and groans of irrigation pumps that were the lifeblood of their farm. He felt a strange kinship with the silent Kronos, a thrum of sympathy for its complex, misunderstood heart. He'd watched the experts, listened to their complex jargon, and seen the flicker of bafflement in their eyes. He'd noticed the way the ambient temperature in Bay 7 seemed to subtly fluctuate around the Kronos, a phenomenon no one else had commented on, and the almost imperceptible hum, more a feeling in his bones than a sound, that emanated from its core when certain diagnostic sequences were run. These were the kinds of subtle tells his grandfather, a man who could diagnose a SICU from 100 yards, had taught him a heed in the natural world. Today, the tension was a physical presence. Sterling had just concluded another fruitless and reportedly explosive conference call with the international consortium funding the Kronos project. He strode back into Bay 7, his face pale with a controlled fury. Another week, he announced, his voice dangerously low. They've given us one more week. After that, they pull the plug, not just on the Kronos, but potentially on future collaborations. This project's failure could cripple us. He glared at the silent engine, as if it were a personal affront. Dr. Thorne began to offer a new, highly complex theory involving tachyon particle interference, but Sterling waved him into silence. Theories, Doctor. We are drowning in theories. What I need is a spark, a sign, a whisper of life from that monument to futility. Liam, pausing in his sweeping, felt a familiar pang. He knew that feeling of a machine on the brink, misunderstood, its potential locked away. He'd felt it with the old Lister diesel that powered their mill, an engine everyone else had given up on, but which, after weeks of patient listening and gentle adjustments based on its unique character, he had coaxed back into reliable service. He wouldn't dare speak, of course. He was just the farmer's son, the boy who swept the floors. But the Kronos seemed to sigh in the ensuing silence. A silent plea he alone seemed to register. The air crackled with unspoken despair, the gleam of the silent engine a cold, hard reflection of impending disaster. Mr. Sterling's gaze swept across the assembled team, his eyes like chips of granite. Dr. Thorne was nervously adjusting his spectacles, his earlier confidence visibly deflated. Lena Hansen, her arms crossed, stared at the Kronos with a mixture of professional frustration and personal offense, as if the engine silence was a direct insult to her skills. The other technicians and junior engineers studiously avoided their employer's fiery gaze, busying themselves with tasks that suddenly seemed intensely important. So, Sterling continued, his voice a low growl that promised an eruption. No new insights? No brilliant flashes of inspiration from the collective genius I pay so handsomely. He kicked at a stray power cable near the Kronos' base, a small, violent gesture that made several people flinch. This isn't just about money anymore, though God knows we're hemorrhaging that. This is about reputation. My reputation. The reputation of Sterling Precision Engineering. He took a deep, steadying breath, though it did little to calm the tremor of fury in his voice. If this engine doesn't come online, if we can't even make a cough, we're not just losing a contract. We're losing credibility. We'll be a laughingstock. Liam, who had resumed his sweeping in a far corner, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible, heard every word. He felt a strange empathy for Mr. Sterling, despite the man's abrasive demeanor. He understood the pride in one's work, the deep sting of inexplicable failure, especially when so much was riding on it. He'd seen that same look in his father's eyes after a freak hailstorm had wiped out half their barley crop. He found himself unconsciously tracing the outline of a cogwheel with the toe of his worn work boot, his mind picturing the intricate pathways within the Kronos, the flow of energies he had imagined, the subtle imbalances he had sensed. He recalled the almost inaudible whine the primary magnetic conduit emitted just before a diagnostic sequence failed, a whine that changed pitch ever so slightly depending on the ambient humidity in the workshop, something he noticed because it reminded him of the way the old weather vane on their barn would sing before a storm. It was a fleeting thought, a whisper of an idea, but it snagged in his mind. Without conscious thought, almost as if the words were pulled from him by the intense pressure in the room, he murmured, just loud enough for the silence to carry it. It's like she's holding her breath, waiting for the right dew point, sir. Like some seeds afore they'll sprout. The sweeping stopped. All activity in Bay 7 ceased. Every head turned toward the corner where Liam stood, broom still in hand, his face flushing a deep crimson as he realized he'd spoken aloud. The silence that followed was profound, heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the main workshop generator. Mr. Sterling turned slowly, his expression one of utter disbelief, then a dawning, dangerous incredulity. Did you say something, Henderson? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Liam swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. And nothing important, sir. Just thinking aloud. Rambling. My apologies. Rambling about dew points and seeds? Sterling's eyebrow arched. He took a step towards Liam, then another, until he was standing directly in front of the boy. The disparity in their attire, in their very presence, was stark. The impeccably tailored magnate and the young man in his slightly too large, faded overalls. My multi-million-dollar prototype, the pinnacle of modern engineering, is waiting for the bloody dew point. Is it? Is it your expert diagnosis, Henderson Jr.? A few nervous, quickly suppressed snickers rippled through the assembled engineers. Dr. Thorne looked aghast. Lena Hansen just shook her head, a flicker of pity in her eyes for the boy. Liam felt his ears burn, but he met Sterling's gaze. There was no defiance in his eyes, just a quiet earnestness. Not exactly like that, sir. But on the farm, some things, delicate things, they need conditions to be just so. Not just the big things everyone sees, but the little things. The air, the feel of it. This engine, she feels sensitive. like she's waiting for something small to be right before she'll wake. Sterling stared at him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Then, he threw his head back and laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was harsh, brittle, laced with sheer, unadulterated frustration and a deep, cynical bitterness. Oh, that's rich. That is truly rich. My apologies, Dr. Thorne, Ms. Hanson. It seems we've all been overlooking the bleeding obvious. We don't need your PhDs, your years of experience. We need a bloody shaman, a witch doctor, or perhaps just a farmer's boy with a feel for the dew point. He was working himself into a lather, his earlier controlled fury now finding an unexpected, almost ludicrous target. You know what, Henderson, he said, jabbing a finger towards Liam, a reckless, goaded light in his eyes. Since you're so attuned to its sensitivities, why don't you give it a go? You fix this impossible engine. You make this seed sprout by, let's say, the end of the week. Friday. If you do, he paused, a cruel, challenging smile twisting his lips. If by some miracle of bovine intuition you actually get that thing to so much as whimper, I'll not only give you a bonus that'll buy your father's farm 10 times over, but I'll personally fund your entire engineering education at any university you choose. Full scholarship. The works. The assembled engineers gasped. Liam's father, Thomas, who had entered Bay 7 moments before to deliver some paperwork and had witnessed the latter part of this exchange, stepped forward, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, please. He's just a lad. He doesn't know what he's saying. He didn't mean any disrespect. Sterling waved him away. But he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing purr, his gaze locked on Liam. If you fail, and you will fail, if you so much as scratch the paintwork or, God forbid, make it even more inert than it already is, then you, your father, and your mystical insights into dew points can find alternative employment. Effective immediately. How does that sound for a dare, farm boy? Liam stood very still. The weight of every eye in the room was on him. He could feel his father's terror, the engineer's scornful pity, Sterling's mocking challenge. He looked at the massive, silent Kronos engine. He felt that strange, inexplicable pull, that whisper of understanding. He thought of the farm, of his family's struggles, of the quiet, desperate hope his father held for him. He took a deep breath, the scent of ozone and hot metal filling his lungs. Then, in a voice that was surprisingly steady, surprisingly calm, he said, I accept your dare, Mr. Sterling. The words, I accept your dare, Mr. Sterling, dropped into the supercharged silence of Bay 7 with the impact of a dropped anvil. Thomas Henderson let out a strangled gasp, his hand flying to his chest as if to physically restrain his son from this act of monumental folly. Dr. Thorne's jaw, which had been slowly descending throughout Sterling's tirade, now seemed to hit his expensive silk tie. Lena Hanson merely stared, her analytical mind struggling to process this utterly illogical turn of events. Even the junior technicians, who had been enjoying the spectacle, now looked vaguely horrified. Alistair Sterling himself was, for a fleeting second, rendered speechless. He had expected a stammered apology, a terrified retraction, perhaps tears. He had intended his outrageous dare as a theatrical display of his own ultimate frustration, a way to underscore the sheer impossibility of the task, to vent his spleen upon an inconsequential target before the axe inevitably fell on the Kronos project. He had not, in his wildest imaginamientos, expected the farmer's boy to call his bluff with such quiet, unwavering resolve. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. There was a flash of respect, quickly suppressed, for the boy's sheer nerve. There was a dawning, uncomfortable realization of the irresponsibility of his own outburst. And yet, beneath it all, a tiny, perverse spark of curiosity ignited. What if, against all conceivable odds, this unassuming lad, with his talk of dew points and sensitivities, actually possessed some kind of insight? It was a ridiculous notion, of course, but the Kronos had defied all logic, all conventional expertise. Perhaps an unconventional approach, however outlandish, was precisely what it needed. Or perhaps, Sterling thought with a returning flicker of his ingrained cynicism, This would simply be a faster, more dramatic implosion, a final, absurd chapter in the Chronos saga. You accept? Sterling finally managed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, steely resolve. His dare had been public. His pride and the implicit authority of his word within his own company were now on the line. He couldn't easily retract it, not without looking like a fool or a bully backing down from child. Are you fully aware of the terms, Henderson? The consequences of failure are significant. For you, and for your father. Liam met his gaze squarely. The flush had faded from his cheeks, replaced by a pale, focused determination. Yes, sir. I understand. Thomas Henderson finally found his voice, rough with anguish. Liam, no. Son, you can't. This isn't like the old Thresher. This is beyond anything. Mr. Sterling, he's just a boy. He doesn't grasp the complexities, the financial implications. The boy seems to grasp them well enough. Thomas, Sterling cut in, his tone hardening as he regained his composure, the businessman reasserting control. He has accepted the terms of his own free will. The dare stands. He turned back to Liam. Very well, young Henderson. Base 7 is yours. The Chronos is yours. You have until 5 p.m. on Friday. You will have access to all standard tools and diagnostic equipment. My engineering team. He waved a dismissive hand towards Thorne and Hansen, who looked thoroughly aghast, will not assist you unless you specifically request their direct, supervised input for tasks clearly beyond your solitary capability, such as heavy lifting. They are, after all, a ghost of his earlier sarcasm returned, demonstrably unable to solve this particular puzzle themselves. Their role will be observational. He paused, then added, with a chilling lack of inflection, do not disappoint me further, Henderson. The cost of disappointment, in this instance, is very, very high. With that, he turned on his heel and strode towards his office, leaving behind a workshop frozen in a state of stunned disbelief and palpable dread. The other engineers and technicians slowly began to disperse, muttering amongst themselves, casting glances that ranged from pity to outright scorn towards Liam. Dr. Thorne was heard to mutter something about utter madness and the end of rational engineering. Lena Hansen simply shook her head, a frown etched deep between her brows, though her eyes, as she glanced at Liam, held a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps a reluctant curiosity. Liam stood alone for a moment, the massive, silent Chronos engine looming before him like a dormant titan. The weight of the dare, the hopes and fears of his father, the scorn of the experts, all seemed to press down on him. Yet, as he looked at the intricate, silent machine, he felt not fear, but a strange sense of calm, a quiet thrum of connection. This engine wasn't just a collection of parts to him. It was a puzzle, a personality, a silent story waiting to be understood. He thought of the lessons from the farm, the patience required to coax a reluctant seed to sprout, the keen observation needed to understand the subtle language of the land, the resilience to face down failure and try again with a different approach. This, he realized, was no different. It was just a much, much bigger field to plow. He took a deep breath, the familiar scent of oil and metal now tinged with the faintest, almost imperceptible trace of ozone that always seemed to linger around the Chronos. He walked towards it, not with the hesitant deference of an underling, but with the quiet confidence of someone approaching a familiar, if challenging, friend. His real work was about to begin. The first day of Liam's audacious undertaking began not with the clang of tools or the hum of diagnostic equipment, but with an almost monastic stillness. While the rest of Sterling Precision Engineering buzzed with its usual Tuesday morning activity, the whine of lathes, the hiss of pneumatic tools, the urgent chatter of production schedules, Base 7 became an oasis of peculiar quiet. Liam, after a sleepless night, spent sketching intricate diagrams of the Chronos from memory and cross-referencing them with the few publicly available schematics he'd managed to find online. Most of its core design was a closely guarded Sterling secret, arrived before dawn. He didn't immediately approach the Chronos. Instead, he found an old, discarded wooden crate dragged it to a spot about 10 feet from the silent behemoth, and sat. For hours, he just sat there, observing. He wasn't looking at the engine in the way a mechanic typically inspects a machine for visible faults. He was watching it the way a shepherd watches a flock, or a naturalist observes a wild creature in its habitat. He noted the way the early morning light, filtering through the high, grimy windows of Base 7, struck the polished surfaces of its conduits, the subtle shifts in shadow as the sun climbed. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole body, trying to sense the almost subaudible vibrations he'd felt before, the subtle shifts in its internal resonance. He had brought a small, worn notebook and a carpenter's pencil, and occasionally he would make a small, almost cryptic note or a quick, impressionistic sketch, not of components, but of what he termed energy pathways or stress points, concepts that would have made Dr. Thorne shudder. The other employees, as they arrived, cast curious, mostly disdainful glances towards Base 7. The story of Sterling's folly and the farm boys dare had already become workshop legend. Most expected to see Liam either staring blankly at the machine in terror or, more likely, already making a fool of himself by randomly tinkering with delicate, multi-million-dollar components. What they saw instead was this quiet, meditative stillness. It was baffling. It was, to many of them, infuriatingly passive. What's he doing then? Praying to it? One of the welders muttered to a machinist, loud enough for Liam to overhear if he'd been paying attention. But Liam seemed oblivious, lost in his own world of focused observation. Mr. Sterling, from his glass-walled office overlooking the workshop floor, watched with a mixture of growing impatience and an unsettling, almost unwilling intrigue. He had expected something, action, noise, perhaps even a small, controlled explosion, given the boys' apparent lack of conventional expertise. This silent vigil was unnerving. It felt less like engineering and more like, well, he didn't quite know what it felt like, but it certainly wasn't how one fixed a revolutionary power generator. Thomas Henderson, Liam's father, hovered anxiously near the entrance to Base 7, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He tried again that morning to reason with Liam, to convince him to apologize to Sterling, to withdraw from this insane dare. But Liam had been resolute, his quiet determination unshakable. Now, Thomas could only watch, his prayers silent and desperate. Around mid-morning, Liam finally rose from his crate. He walked slowly around the Kronos, not touching it yet, but examining it from every angle, his gaze lingering on connection points, on conduit junctions, on the almost invisible seams where different alloys met. He then approached the main control interface, a complex panel of touch screens and glowing readouts that had baffled even Lena Hansen. He didn't try to activate any sequences. He simply placed his calloused farmer's hands lightly on its cool surface, closed his eyes, and stood there for a full 5 minutes, as if trying to feel the machine's locked-up energy, its silent frustrations. Dr. Thorne, passing by on his way to a fruitless data analysis session, saw this and snorted audibly. Utter charlatanism, he muttered to his assistant. He'll be dowsing for ley lines next. Liam, if he heard, gave no sign. He then retrieved a small, canvas tool roll from the bag he'd brought from home. It didn't contain the gleaming, chrome vanadium tools of the Sterling workshop. Instead, it held an assortment of older, well-worn instruments, some inherited from his grandfather, a renowned water diviner as well as a passable mechanic, including a curious set of tuning forks of various sizes and a strange, stethoscope-like device with a long, slender metal probe instead of a bell. These were his listening tools, as he called them, tools he used on the farm to diagnose the subtle ailments of their aging machinery by sensing discordant vibrations or blockages in fluid flow. He began to gently tap various points on the Kronos' casing with one of the smaller tuning forks, then pressed the probe of his listening device against the metal, his head cocked, his expression one of intense concentration. He was, quite literally, listening to the silence, searching for the dissonant notes in its enforced stillness. The sight was so bizarre, so utterly alien to the high-tech environment of sterling precision engineering that even the most hardened cynics paused in their work to stare, a mixture of ridicule and a strange, almost fearful curiosity dawning on their faces. The farmer's boy wasn't just trying to fix an engine. He was communing with it. The second day of Liam's vigil over the Kronos engine began much as the first had, with quiet observation and the employment of his unorthodox diagnostic tools. The initial ridicule from the other workshop employees had begun to curdle into a sort of bewildered, slightly unnerved silence. There was something about Liam's unwavering focus, his almost reverent interaction with a massive machine, that defied easy dismissal. It was clear he wasn't just randomly poking at it. There was a method to his apparent madness, even if no one else could fathom what it was. Mr. Sterling found himself increasingly drawn to the drama unfolding in Bay 7. He made more frequent trips from his office, ostensibly to check on other projects, but his gaze would inevitably be pulled towards the farmer's boy and the silent titan. He saw Liam meticulously charting what he called energy eddies around the Kronos, using a compass and a device that looked suspiciously like a modified dowsing rod. He saw him gently rubbing different sections of the engine's casing with various natural oils and resins he'd brought from the farm, beeswax polish for some of the conduits, a lanolin-based salve for certain seals, murmuring to the machine as he worked, as if soothing a skittish colt. It was utterly unscientific, almost preposterously so, yet Sterling couldn't shake the memory of the boy's quiet conviction, his talk of sensitivities and dew points. The Kronos had defied science. Perhaps, just perhaps, it required something else. Lena Hansen, the pragmatic chief engineer, found herself watching Liam with a growing, if reluctant, fascination. She had initially dismissed him as a deluded amateur, but she had also seen the genuine, if inexplicable, connection he seemed to have with the Kronos. She saw the logic in his patience, even if his methods were bizarre. She'd spent weeks trying to force the Kronos to yield its secrets through logic and computational analysis. Liam was trying to coax them out through empathy and a kind of mechanical intuition she hadn't encountered before. She even found herself, during a quiet moment, asking him about the tuning forks. Liam, without looking up from his work, explained, "Everything has its own song, Ms. Hansen. Even metal. When something's wrong, the song goes sour or a note gets stuck. I'm just listening for the stuck notes." His simple explanation, delivered with an unshakable earnestness, left her speechless. It was folk wisdom, perhaps, but it was also a profound metaphor for the complex interplay of resonances and frequencies that underpinned much of modern physics, albeit expressed in a language far removed from her textbooks. Later that day, Liam focused his attention on what he termed the respiratory system of the Kronos, its massive cooling conduits and what he believed were its primary energy intake valves. He noticed a faint, almost invisible discoloration around one of the main coolant junctions, a slightly different temperature gradient that his sensitive fingertips could detect, but which had registered as within normal parameters on all the advanced thermal imaging scans. He also sensed a subtle, high-pitched blockage when he applied his listening device to that section, a pinched note, as he described it to his notebook. He spent hours carefully disassembling that specific junction, a task made difficult by the sheer size and unfamiliar design of the components. Thomas Henderson, despite his lingering fear, couldn't stay away. He wordlessly assisted Liam with the heavier pieces, his gnarled farmer's hand surprisingly adept at supporting the delicate, high-tech alloys. As Liam finally managed to separate a crucial valve assembly, something small and dark clinked onto the pristine white inspection cloth he had laid beneath. It was a tiny sliver of metal, no bigger than a fingernail clipping, almost invisible against the darker components. It looked like a machining burr, a remnant from the manufacturing process, so small it would have been easily overlooked, yet lodged precisely in a way that could conceivably disrupt the delicate flow dynamics within the valve. Liam picked it up, his eyes shining. "Well now," he murmured, "what have we here? A thorn in your side, old girl." Dr. Thorne, who had wandered over, drawn by the unusual activity, peered at the tiny sliver with disdain. Surely you don't think that minuscule fragment is the cause of a multi-system catastrophic failure, he scoffed. Liam looked up at him, his expression calm. Sometimes, doctor, he said, his voice quiet but firm, it's the smallest stone in your shoe that makes you limp the hardest. This engine, she's got a very sensitive constitution. He carefully placed the metal sliver in a specimen bag, then began the painstaking process of cleaning and reassembling the valve, his touch as gentle and precise as a watchmaker's. Mr. Sterling, watching from the doorway of his office, felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a tiny, almost bougainvillea flicker of hope. The farmer's boy was finding things, small things, yes, but things that everyone else, with all their sophisticated equipment and advanced degrees, had missed. The impossible was perhaps beginning to look just a little less so. The discovery of the tiny metal burr, dismissed by Dr. Thorne but regarded by Liam as a significant clue, marked a subtle shift in the atmosphere of Bay 7. While most of the engineering team remained deeply skeptical, a few, like Lena Hansen and some of the younger technicians who had witnessed Liam's meticulous work, began to watch him with a less jaundiced eye. There was a quiet intensity about him, a profound connection with the silent Chronos, that was difficult to entirely disregard, however unorthodox his methods. Liam spent the remainder of the third day and most of the fourth continuing his painstaking examination and tuning of the Chronos. He moved from system to system, not in a linear, textbook fashion, but following what he described as the energy pathways of the machine, guided by his tuning forks, his listening device, and that uncanny intuition that seemed to allow him to sense its internal state. He found other minor anomalies, a grounding wire that, while technically connected, had a faint, almost imperceptible looseness that he felt was creating a static dissonance, a series of magnetic conduits that, according to his dowsing rod, had a conflicted polarity field, which he meticulously realigned using carefully placed shims of non-conductive material he fashioned himself. Each adjustment was small, almost insignificant on its own, but Liam worked with the conviction that the Chronos' failure was not due to a single catastrophic fault, but a cascade of these tiny, overlooked stresses, an accumulation of stuck notes that had thrown the entire symphony into disarray. He spoke to the engine constantly, soft murmurs of encouragement, apologies when a bolt was particularly stubborn, explanations of what he was doing, as if it were a sentient being capable of understanding. "There now. That should ease your breathing a bit," he'd say after adjusting a coolant valve. Or, "Just a little more patience, old girl. We'll get this knot untangled." Mr. Sterling found himself spending less time in his office and more time in Bay 7, a silent, brooding presence, his initial impatience now largely replaced by a kind of fascinated apprehension. He still thought the boy's methods were bordering on the occult, but he could not deny the meticulous care, the profound focus, and the sheer, unwavering determination Liam brought to the task. He saw the boy, exhausted but resolute, refuse his father's pleas to take a proper break, surviving on lukewarm tea and sandwiches eaten absently while poring over his cryptic notes. He saw the way Liam's hands, though callous from farm work, moved with an almost preternatural gentleness and precision over the multi-million-dollar components. He was witnessing a level of dedication, of connection, that he hadn't seen from any of the highly paid experts. Late on Thursday afternoon, Liam announced that he was ready to attempt what he called a low-energy resonance test. He had reconnected all the primary systems, his adjustments made. He explained to a baffled Mr. Sterling and a deeply skeptical Dr. Thorne that he wasn't going to try to fully power up the Chronos. Instead, he wanted to introduce a very low, controlled energy pulse into its core and then, using his array of tuning forks and his listening device, map the song of the engine to see if the stuck notes had been resolved and if the harmony had been restored. Dr. Thorne protested vigorously. "This is unscientific, meaningless. You could destabilize the core matrix with such a haphazard and harmonic input." Liam simply looked at him calmly. "With respect, Doctor, the core matrix is already about as unstable as a sleeping badger. What I'm proposing is more like humming a lullaby to see if it's ready to wake gentle. Sterling, against his better judgment, but swayed by a desperate desire to see any kind of positive response, overruled Thorne. Proceed, Henderson. But if anything goes awry, I hold you personally responsible. Liam nodded, unfazed. He carefully attached a series of his own modified sensors. Essentially small, highly sensitive microphones and vibration detectors he'd built himself for diagnosing farm machinery, to key points on the Kronos. He then connected a small, custom-built pulse generator, powered by a simple car battery, to a secondary input node, bypassing the main startup sequence. The workshop fell silent. Even the cynical technicians gathered at a respectful distance, their curiosity overriding their skepticism. Liam took a deep breath, then activated the pulse generator. A barely audible hum filled the air, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate deep within the Kronos. Liam moved swiftly, his tuning forks in hand, touching them to various points on the engine, then holding them to his ear, his eyes closed in concentration. He moved from point to point, listening, occasionally making a small adjustment to a dial on his pulse generator, his lips moving silently. For nearly an hour, this strange, silent concert continued. Liam, lost in his world of sound and vibration, seemed almost to dance around the massive engine, a conductor coaxing a response from a reluctant orchestra. Finally, he straightened up, a thin film of sweat on his brow, but his eyes were shining. She's singing, he whispered, almost to himself. The notes, they're clearer now. Still a little shy in the upper register, but the blockages, I think most of them are gone. He turned to Sterling. Sir, I believe she may be ready to try and wake properly now. Not a lullaby, a proper good morning. The audacity of it, the quiet confidence, was breathtaking. Mr. Sterling looked at Dr. Thorne, whose face was a mask of horrified disbelief. He looked at Lena Hansen, who was watching Liam with an expression of profound, almost fearful respect. He looked at his multi-million-dollar engine, which, for the first time in weeks, didn't feel like a cold, dead lump of metal, but like something expectant. Something, perhaps, that was indeed ready to sing. The dare, and its looming Friday deadline, suddenly felt very, very real. Friday morning dawned with an almost palpable sense of expectation hanging over Sterling Precision Engineering. The news of Liam's resonance test and his quiet declaration that the Kronos might be ready had spread like wildfire. Bay 7, usually the domain of a select few, now drew a hushed, expectant crowd of engineers, technicians, and even some administrative staff, all gathered at a respectful distance, their faces a mixture of hope, skepticism, and morbid curiosity. Today was the day. 5 p.m. was the deadline. Liam arrived looking tired but strangely serene, his worn overalls bearing fresh smudges of grease and something that looked suspiciously like beeswax. He carried his canvas tool roll and his ever-present notebook. His father, Thomas, walked beside him, his face etched with a mixture of terror and a fierce, unshakable pride. Mr. Sterling was already there, pacing before the Kronos like an expectant father outside a delivery room. He had barely slept. The image of Liam, communing with the engine through sound and vibration, had replayed in his mind throughout the night. It was madness. Utter, unadulterated madness. And yet, Dr. Thorne and Lena Hansen stood a little apart, Thorne looking grim and muttering about the dangers of uncontrolled energy surges, Hansen looking thoughtful, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Liam. Liam didn't acknowledge the crowd. His focus was entirely on the Kronos. He performed a series of final, gentle checks, his hands moving with a familiar grace over its complex surfaces. He laid a hand on its central core housing for a long moment, his eyes closed, as if offering a silent word of encouragement. Then, he straightened up and looked at Mr. Sterling. Sir, he said, his voice calm and clear despite the tremor of exhaustion he couldn't quite conceal. I believe she's as ready as she'll ever be. With your permission, I'd like to initiate the full startup sequence. Sterling swallowed, his own throat suddenly dry. This was it. The culmination of weeks of frustration, millions of dollars, and now, this bizarre, improbable dare. "The honor, Henderson," he said, his voice huskier than he intended, "is all yours." Liam nodded. He walked to the main control interface, the panel that had resisted every attempt by the experts. His fingers, calloused and smudged, moved over the cool, responsive touchscreens, inputting a sequence of commands. Not the standard startup protocol, Sterling noted with a jolt, but a modified sequence, one that seemed to bring the engine online in gentler, more incremental stages, almost like coaxing a hibernating bear from its slumber rather than shocking it awake. The workshop held its collective breath. The initial hum was soft, a low thrum that resonated deep in the chest. Then, a series of clicks and whirs as internal mechanisms engaged. Lights on the control panel flickered, then steadied, glowing a soft, healthy green where before they had stubbornly remained amber or red. The hum grew, deepening, a resonant bass note that seemed to fill the vast space of Bay 7. There was no coughing, no sputtering this time. Just a smooth, inexorable buildup of power, a gathering of forces. Liam's hands remained on the controls, his head tilted, listening intently, his expression unreadable. The Kronos seemed to take a deep, metallic breath. The floor beneath their feet began to vibrate, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. The deep hum escalated, transforming into a powerful, incredibly pure throb, a sound unlike anything Sterling had ever heard from a machine. It wasn't the roar of a combustion engine, nor the whine of turbine. It was something new, something alive. It was the sound of controlled, immense energy, a perfectly balanced, harmonic resonance that seemed to sing through the very structure of the building. The main power indicators on the Kronos, which had remained stubbornly at 0 for 6 long weeks, began to climb. 10%, 30, 50, 75. They reached 100% and held steady, bathed in a calm, unwavering green light. The Kronos engine was online. Fully, unequivocally, miraculously online. Its powerful, harmonious song filled the workshop, a sound not of brute force, but of perfectly attuned, sustainable power. It was, in a word, magnificent. For a full minute, the only sound in Bay 7 was the powerful, harmonious thrum of the fully operational Kronos engine. It was a sound that vibrated through the concrete floor, resonated in the steel girders of the roof, and seemed to settle deep within the chest of every single person present. It was the sound of the impossible made possible, a symphony of controlled energy where once there had been only stubborn, expensive silence. Liam Henderson stood before the control panel, his shoulders slightly slumped with exhaustion, but his face was illuminated by the soft green glow of the active displays and by an inner light of quiet, profound satisfaction. He made a few tiny adjustments on the touchscreen, his movements economical and precise, then stepped back, his gaze fixed on the magnificent machine he had coaxed back to life. The assembled crowd was speechless. Jaws were literally agape. Dr. Thorne's spectacles had slipped to the end of his nose, his mouth slightly open, his carefully constructed theories apparently dissolving in the resonant hum of the Kronos. Lena Hansen was staring at the engine, then at Liam, then back at the engine, a slow smile of utter astonishment and dawning respect spreading across her face. Thomas Henderson, Liam's father, was openly weeping, his arm thrown around his son's shoulders, murmuring incoherent words of pride and relief. Mr. Alastair, Sterling felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He walked slowly, almost reverently, towards the Kronos, his hand outstretched as if to touch a sacred relic. He laid his palm against its gently vibrating casing. He could feel the power, the life, the perfect harmonious rhythm within. It was breathtaking. He turned to Liam, his carefully constructed composure utterly shattered, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Henderson," he began, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. He cleared his throat, struggling to find the words. "Liam, you did it. You actually did it." Liam offered a small, tired smile. She did it, sir, he corrected gently. She just needed a bit of understanding, and for someone to listen to her proper song. Sterling looked from the boy to the engine, then back to the boy. The simplicity, the profound humility of the statement struck him to the core. This wasn't just about fixing a machine. This was about a different way of seeing, of listening, of connecting. "The dare," Sterling said, his voice gaining a little strength, though it was now laced with an emotion no one in that workshop had ever heard from him before. Genuine, unadulterated humility. "The scholarship, the bonus, consider them a pittance, Henderson. A down payment on what you've truly accomplished here today. You haven't just saved this project. You haven't just saved this company's reputation. You've shown us all something." He gestured vaguely to the stunned engineers. Something we had forgotten, or perhaps never knew. He took a deep breath. The terms were clear. You won, Liam Henderson. You won spectacularly. The silence that followed was broken by a single, hesitant clap. It came from Lena Hansen, then another from one of the junior technicians. And then, Base 7 erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause, a spontaneous, heartfelt ovation for the quiet farmer's boy who had achieved the impossible. The sound washed over Liam, who simply stood there, leaning slightly against his proud, weeping father, a look of quiet, exhausted relief on his face. He had listened to the engine. He had understood its needs. He had helped to find its voice. And in doing so, he had, perhaps, helped a few hardened, cynical hearts find a little bit of their own lost harmony. The Kronos engine hummed on, its powerful song a testament not just to advanced engineering, but to the quiet, unassuming genius of a young man who knew that even the most complex machines, like the Earth itself, responded best to patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen to their silent secrets. The impossible had been achieved, not with brute force or conventional wisdom, but with a farmer's wisdom and a touch of something that felt very much like magic. The reverberations of the Kronos engine's successful activation and Liam Henderson's astonishing triumph continued to echo through Sterling precision engineering for weeks. The initial shock and awe settled into a profound, company-wide respect for the quiet farmer's son. He was no longer just Henderson Jr. or the farm boy. He was Liam, the lad who had listened to the silent heart of a machine and coaxed it back to life when all the experts had declared it a lost cause. Mr. Sterling, true to his word and with a newfound, almost zealous enthusiasm, fast-tracked Liam's scholarship. He didn't just offer a generic engineering program. He worked with Liam to find a specialized institute that focused on sustainable energy systems and innovative diagnostic techniques. A place where Liam's unique blend of intuitive understanding and burgeoning technical interest could truly flourish. The bonus he awarded Thomas and Liam was indeed substantial enough to secure the Henderson family farm for generations to come, lifting a burden of worry that had shadowed Thomas's life for years. But more significant than the financial rewards were the changes within Sterling Precision Engineering itself. Alistair Sterling, humbled and profoundly impressed, initiated a company-wide reevaluation of their problem-solving methodologies. He established a new intuitive diagnostics division, a small, experimental unit tasked with looking at intractable problems from unconventional angles, encouraging approaches that blended traditional engineering with the kind of empathetic, holistic observation Liam had demonstrated. He even, much to Dr. Thorne's initial horror, insisted on incorporating elements of what he now called mechanical empathy into their training programs for new engineers. "It's not enough to know how a machine should work," Sterling declared in a company-wide meeting, his gaze lingering for a moment on Liam, who sat quietly in the back row. "We must also learn to listen to how it feels, to understand its unique character, its subtle distress signals. Young Mr. Henderson here has taught us that even the most advanced technology can benefit from a touch of old-fashioned wisdom, the kind that comes not just from books, but from a deep connection with the world around us, whether that world is made of soil or steel." Liam, despite the sudden influx of attention and opportunity, remained remarkably unchanged. He was still quiet, still humble, still more comfortable listening than speaking. He continued his work at Sterling's, though now he was often called upon by Lena Hansen or other senior engineers to offer his unique perspective on particularly stubborn mechanical or systemic issues. They learned to value his silences, his long periods of observation, his sometimes cryptic but invariably insightful comments about a machine not sounding right in its spirit or feeling a blockage in its flow. His father, Thomas, walked with a new lightness in his step, his pride in his son a quiet, constant joy. He still worked the farm, but the desperate edge of worry was gone, replaced by a deep gratitude and a renewed sense of hope for the future. He knew Liam would go on to do great things, not just because of his intellect, but because of his heart, his profound empathy for the intricate, often misunderstood workings of the world. The Kronos engine itself became a legend, not just within Sterling precision engineering, but in the wider world of sustainable energy. It performed flawlessly, exceeding all its design specifications, its powerful, harmonious hum a constant reminder of the unlikely triumph that had brought it online. Visitors to the facility, expecting to hear tales of complex algorithms and advanced physics, were often surprised to learn that its resurrection was largely due to a farmer's son who had listened to it with tuning forks and treated it with the patience one might reserve for a troubled living creature. The legacy of Liam Henderson's achievement was not just in the successful operation of a revolutionary engine, nor in the transformation of a cynical, hard-nosed businessman. It was in the quiet validation of a different kind of intelligence, a different way of knowing. It was a testament to the fact that true wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places, that the keen observations honed by a life close to the earth, the understanding of subtle changes, of interconnectedness, of the patience required for growth and healing, could be applied with profound effect even in the most technologically advanced environments. Liam's secret, as some in the workshop still half-jokingly refer to his methods, was no secret at all. It was the open secret of deep listening, of empathetic connection, of respecting the inherent nature of a thing, whether it be a stubborn tractor, a field of barley, or a multi-million-dollar prototype engine. It was the understanding that sometimes the most complex problems require not more complexity, but a return to simpler, more fundamental truths. As Liam prepared to leave for university, his future bright with promise, Mr. Sterling hosted a small farewell gathering for him in Bay 7, right beside the now quietly thrumming Kronos engine. The entire company was there, from the senior executives to the newest apprentices. Dr. Thorne, his initial skepticism long since replaced by a grudging, then genuine admiration, even made a short, somewhat flustered speech about the serendipitous intersection of intuitive genius and empirical challenge. Lena Hansen presented Liam with a beautifully crafted set of professional engineering instruments, her smile warm and sincere. But it was Thomas Henderson's words that resonated most deeply. Standing beside his son, his voice thick with emotion, he said simply, "My boy always knew how to listen to the land. Turns out, the land taught him how to listen to just about anything. I reckon that's a skill worth more than all the gold in the world." Liam, characteristically, said little, offering only a shy smile and a quiet thank you. But as he looked around at the faces of the people whose lives he had inadvertently touched, from the transformed Mr. Sterling to the once scornful mechanics, who now regarded him with something akin to awe, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He knew his journey was just beginning. He would learn the complex mathematics, the advanced physics, the intricate theories of engineering. But he would never forget the fundamental lessons of the farm, the wisdom of the tuning forks, the profound truth that even the most sophisticated creations possess a song, and that the greatest skill of all is the ability to listen to it with an open heart and an empathetic mind. The story of the farmer's son and the impossible engine serves as a powerful reminder to us all. In a world increasingly dominated by data and algorithms, by rigid protocols and conventional expertise, there is still immense power in quiet observation, in intuitive understanding, in the courage to challenge assumptions and to listen to the whispers that others dismiss. Talent can bloom in the most unexpected soil. Wisdom can wear the humblest of guises. And sometimes, The key to solving the most impossible of problems lies not in greater force or more complex theories, but in a simpler, deeper, more human connection. So, the next time you face a challenge that seems insurmountable, remember Liam Henderson. Pause. Listen. Trust those quiet, intuitive nudges. For the secret to unlocking the impossible might just be waiting in the silence, in the stuck notes, in a language that only a truly listening heart can understand.